There are a lot of questions that have to be answered regarding baiting. It's complicated and it varies a lot based on the conditions you're faced with and state laws. How often should you bait? How much bait should you use? What are the best types of bait for keeping bears coming back over and over again? What baits are good for starting out a bait? What do I do about these nocturnal bears? Those are all really good questions that have to be answered, and there are variable answers depending on the types of situations you're faced with. State laws are a big part of this. For example, in Wisconsin, you have to seal your bait up in some sort of a container. You also cannot use meat, and you can only use 10 gallons of bait per day. In Minnesota, you can't use anything with bones in it. In some states, you can't use chocolate. There are considerable differences based on these types of things. Now, the western states, basically, there's very little restriction. Canada is the same way. So it's your responsibility to know the restrictions in your own state and where you're baiting, and then adapt the conditions and the types of baiting strategy accordingly. But within those parameters, there are some rules, some guidelines, let's say, that will help you understand these types of questions. How often should you bait? How much bait should you use? And what types of baits? Those are the three primary questions we're going to cover here. So take what you can get out of this and adapt it to your own area, and I think it'll help you have a better chance to get a big bear this coming year.
The topics relating to baiting are some of the most widely discussed and debated issues there are in bear hunting. The topic of how much bait to use is probably number one. Often it is limited by either the amount allowed by state law or the amount the hunter can acquire. My advice is to get more bait than you think you will need and then get some more. I get a lot of pastries from local grocery stores. I also get beef fat trimmings and fruit whenever I can. I have 4 large chest freezers so I can store quite a bit. I will supplement these supplies with trail mix and candies that I get from Lucky 7 Bear Bait. Trail mix is one of the best baits I have found, and I use quite a bit of it. It's the best bait there is for keeping bears coming back when there is an abundance of natural foods. It's hard to beat pastries for filling up a bear so he will lay up nearby and be close when he gets hungry again. But using sweets alone will only last about a week or two, and then the bears start to move on. That's one reason why it's really important to use a variety of baits at each site. Another reason is because bears are individuals and each bear seems to prefer certain foods over another. Some bears don't care much for apples, for example, yet others will devour them first. Some bears will dig down through all the sweets to get to the beef scraps. Have a variety of baits available at each site and avoid using too much unprocessed dark chocolate. It can make the bears sick if they eat large quantities of it. During hot weather, I do not add the beef scraps until the bait is being hit consistently. They rot quickly and ruin your bait. Once the bears are hitting daily, then add the beef, and add it when it's still frozen if possible. This gives you another 48 hours or so of freshness. Speaking of meat, beavers are like crack cocaine to a bear. Bears are not efficient predators, and they relish meat of any kind whenever they can get it. The beaver is number one on their list. If you can legally use a beaver carcass at your bait, by all means do so. The bears will go to great lengths to get to a beaver. Over the years, I've tried everything I can think of to keep bears coming back during the daylight hours. At one time, I felt that I could cut back on the bait to create a competition scenario and get the bears to come in earlier. Well, the only case I have found that cutting back on bait is effective is when there is just one bear on the bait, and in that case, cutting back can cause him to get hungrier sooner. But that's a rare case because I usually have multiple bears on all my sites. For this reason, I feel it's important to have a reward for the bears each time they show up. It's like training a dog. They get a treat each time they come to the bait. I have become convinced that the best strategy is to have bait at the site at all times, and the competition will take care of itself. That leads to the question of how often the bait should be tended. Over the years, I have been slowly changing my strategy to where I put out more bait and check the baits less often. That's not necessarily true in all cases because sometimes the bait will have a dozen raccoons on it and they'll eat more than the bears are even eating, so you need to feed the bears and protect the bait from raccoons with logs every day. The more you feed, the more you leave scent and the more risk you run of spooking a bear off the bait. While bears in remote areas don't fear humans much, the bears living on the public land where I hunt and many hunters are baiting can go nocturnal as soon as they feel human pressure. I visit the baits during the middle of the day to minimize the risk of bumping a bear and to give my scent a chance to dissipate before evening. I also use scent killer spray to reduce my odor impact. I use Northwood's Bear Product spray scents, powders, and gels whenever opening a bait and give the area a few fresh shots whenever I visit the bait. It's a good idea to use the same scents each time you visit a bait. Changing it up can put the bears on edge. This is particularly true when you start hunting. Using a significant change in scent when you are in the stand, such as a honeyburn, is a bad idea when it hasn't been used before. It might be just enough to make a mature bear uneasy, so he hangs up and waits until after dark to come in. The bears have you patterned, so don't throw them a curveball and give them an excuse to change their patterns.